Hello, I'm hoping everybody is able to hear me. Maybe just give us a little shout. Excellent. Okay, I had some technical difficulties, so I just wanted to check that you could actually hear me. Hello, and thank you for joining me. My name is Viv, and we're going to be talking a little bit about managing difficult conversations. So, firstly, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. As I said, my name's Viv. I'm currently affiliated with Rainy City Roller Derby. I was their travel team captain, the All-Stars captain for 3 seasons. And then I moved on to coaching, and I'm now a member of the leadership team and an active member of the coaching body. I'm also a primary school teacher, so I have a lot of transferable skills there, teaching 3-year-olds and coaching skaters. It's similar vibe. So we're just going to talk a little bit about difficult conversations. As you know, you often encounter those kind of things when you are in a position of leadership. So see a little bit today about what we can do to help. So we're going to discuss what is a difficult conversation, why we avoid difficult conversations, what's the cost of this avoidance if we do, what happens. We're also going to talk a little bit about what is a learning conversation, moving away from a traditional telling conversation and trying to change things into a bit more of a learning conversation. And then we're going to look at some skills and techniques to help you with that. And then we're just going to do a little bit of Q&A at the end. So all the way through this, if you feel like you have a question, please feel free to type it. But then at the end, we'll do a little bit of a free question and answers bit. So we'll start with some quotes, as we always do, from the massively inspirational athlete Gwen Paltrow. She says that you're not learning anything unless you're having the difficult conversations. I'm not quite sure she was making reference to roller derby, but it definitely rings true. And also, sometimes the most important conversations are the most difficult to engage in. And I think that's really important, because you have to remember when you're having these conversations, when you're in the middle of a conversation that's not necessarily fun, it's not necessarily going the way you want to, or afterwards you can feel pretty down when you've just had to engage in something quite grim. And it's important to remember that these conversations are important, and they're only important because you care. So to try and make sure that you keep yourself motivated and you keep your spirits by remembering that if you didn't care, it wouldn't be important to you. So you do these things for a reason. So looking at some important, difficult conversations. So first of all, it's important to kind of identify what is a difficult conversation. And it says here, this is just a little definition. A difficult conversation is any conversation where you have to manage someone's strong feelings, including your own, or manage information sensitively. Now, for the roller derby coach, because a lot of this is people often talk about this in relation to business and the business world. But for a roller derby coach, there's plenty of reasons, like plenty of examples where that might ring true for us. So, for example, breaking bad news. Now, if you were having to break bad news to a skater, for example, telling them that they're dropped from the team, that they've not made the squad, that they're not going to get a lot of game time, just negative, any negative news that they kind of weren't hoping to hear. Also giving feedback could be like about performance or attitude, attendance. Sometimes even when we think we're giving feedback positively, people can take it negatively, and then the conversation quickly becomes a difficult one. The third one would be things like personal problems. I think as a coach or captain or someone in a position of leadership, your skaters or team members will often at times come to you with personal problems, whether that's like to explain attendance or to explain their feelings, or just because you're in that position of trust. People will often come to you and tell you about things that are happening outside of derby, in their private life, and that can be difficult for some people to kind of figure out how to navigate that sensitively. another difficult conversation you might encounter as a roller derby kind of coach is handling grievances. As a coach, you'll often be asked, I find you'll often be asked to get involved with the grievance process if anything arises like that. And that will most certainly involve difficult conversations. And lastly, relationships and conflict. So really, anything that's going to affect, the team dynamic negatively, if you have like interpersonal relationships between team members, between skaters, if there's something negative brewing, any signs of conflict between skaters or team members, that kind of thing. As a coach, you'd want to address that early on, and that would result in you having to take part in quite a difficult conversation at times. So they're the kind of examples that we might see popping up. So let's have a little look. Why do we avoid having difficult conversations? Obviously, gifts don't work, which is a tragedy for me because my whole life is basically based around communicating through gifts. So you'll have to imagine these gifts, I'm afraid. So why would we avoid having difficult conversations? And the first reason really is it's about fear. People are afraid. So what we're afraid of is, I was going to click them down. I don't really know how to do that. So they're all on there. Like a recent workplace study carried out by, I think they were called, CMI. Not sure who they are, probably just some corporate a-holes. But they basically just did a recent workplace study to find out what it is that people specifically are scared of when having difficult conversations. And these are the responses that they got. People are afraid of not knowing how the other person will respond. They're afraid of not being able to get a point across clearly. They're afraid of being in a confrontational situation. Afraid of getting upset or emotional, and likewise they're afraid of the other person getting upset or emotional. And I feel like those are all completely valid fears. Nobody really wants to be in a situation, in any of those 5 situations. So how we manage the conversation can really affect whether we are, whether we find ourselves getting upset or, whether we're able to get our point across clearly. So fear is a big one. One of the other reasons that you might avoid a difficult conversation is basically it's easier. It's easier to just kind of sit back with a pumpkin spice latte and hope that it all goes away, or that someone else will deal with it, and that the problem will just dissipate. But as we found, that's not in history, that's not how it works. So they're the reasons that we might avoid approaching a difficult conversation. But what happens if we do? If we avoid having our conversation or difficult conversations, what's the result of that? What can happen if we totally ignore it or hope someone else will do it? And we're going to have a look at that in a sec. But before we do, I just wanted to kind of have a little break to find out who we've got here, because I think that's like quite long enough of me talking. So I'm going to ask you guys if we could just have a little poll to find out how long everybody's been coaching. So just in the middle, there we go. We're just going to have a little poll to see how long you guys have been coaching, and then we can kind of move on. I just wanted to check. So hopefully you can all do that and the results will come up magically. I don't know how to do it myself. Oh, there we go. Okay, so let's have a look who we've got here. So brilliant. So we've got like a real range of times involved in coaching. Some people that are completely new to all of this, which is good. Our business coach, cool. So I mean, again, that's like a massively transferable skill. As a business coach, I imagine you've had quite a few difficult conversations in your time. Um, and it looks like most people here will have had, yeah, looks like most people here will have had some experience with that. And I know that everybody kind of has their own tricks and ways of managing them, but there's definitely some things we can practice. So we'll have a look at them in a minute. Brilliant. I just wanted to check you're all awake, really. There we go. There you go. That's you. So, what happens if we do avoid these difficult conversations? What's the cost of that? Well, the cost of that, the first cost would be escalation. If you completely bury your head in the sand and hope that an issue will go away, I guarantee you that the problem will grow and it will soon become completely out of your control. As a coach or a person in leadership, you need to be addressing these issues the moment they come up. So you can't avoid the difficult conversations. They are like almost the bread and butter of coaching. It's your job to do this. So as soon as you see the problem there, call the people in and get it done. Other cost of avoidance would be a lack of confidence. And that's to do with your team's belief in you. If they repeatedly see that they can't rely on you to manage these difficult situations or to manage these difficult conversations, and they can't rely on you to be brave enough to see it through, they're going to lose confidence in you as a leader, and they're going to know that they can't turn to you when they need you, and you're ultimately not going to be doing the job that they've voted you in to do, or that you've said you're quite happy to do. So it's really important to not avoid these conversations, really, as much as they might kind of fill you with dread. Let's have a little look. My computer's awful, so you might have to hold on a sec. Okay, so before we move on to that, so we've talked about the cost of avoidance. What I want to do now is I just wanted to do the whiteboard. Let's see if I can find it. Tool. And if I could ask you guys, when you think of a previous conversation that you've had that's really difficult, or imagine trying to tell a skater that they're cut from the team, or just some really awful conversation like that, I want you to just write down one word that you think relating to this. So like it could be an emotion, it could be a swear word, it could be anything. Like what comes into your head when you think of having to have those conversations? Yeah, it's quite hard to write on there, isn't it? Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay, Brill. Oh, that's sad face. So we've got tense. Yeah, definitely. It can definitely make you feel as a skater feel tense. Um, embarrassed, and like you say, I think that's a really important one that often, especially if you're a skater coach or a captain, these people are your friends. The people you're talking with, they're your friends and they're your teammates. So it can be quite awkward and it can be really difficult. I like over it, so over it. Let's have a look. What else have we got? Defensive. Yeah, like when you bring a problem to someone and they just are really defensive, go straight away, go on the defense. Hierarchy. Will you tell me a little more about that word? Hierarchy in terms of I mean, you can put it in the chat if you like, in terms of the leadership hierarchy, or, oh, I wouldn't know about spelling. Is that like hierarchy in terms of the roles people have within the league, or how long they've been skating or how good they are at skating, or what kind of, can you tell me a little bit more about that before we continue? That's very pretty, Hydra. And whilst, oh, there you go. As a coach, I'm also a teammate, and it's hard to talk to people and give feedback. Definitely, yeah. So anyway, that's they're all like perfectly. Oh, I didn't write hierarchy. Oh, but to me, I have the same feeling of patriarchal bullshit when I have to sort of come down on someone, and do anyway. Yeah. So I mean, I think I think there's like anytime you have to have a difficult conversation with anyone, derby or not, there's like a million different factors, outside factors that come into it that are going to affect the conversation, that you can't get rid of, and they're always going to be kind of the backdrop to the conversation. And it's things like that. It's like, you know, gender, class, you know, hierarchy within the league, someone's profession. Like it can be anything that comes into it that can put somebody in a different feeling of either like powerlessness or powerfulness. And I think they're the kind of things that we need to be aware of in order to make the conversation as neutrally based as possible, that both people have an even footing and a fair input and are heard within the conversation. Yeah, exactly. So often people feel educated instead of we learn together, and that's exactly what we're about to go on to, this idea of a learning conversation. So let me see if I can get it back up. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so a learning conversation, it's all about that kind of learner-focused style of feedback. Learner in this case being the person you're speaking with, the skater or the team member. And it's all about them, rather than you telling somebody something or educating somebody about the way the situation is. It's about opening up to their opinions to kind of take on board what they're feeling, so that you both can learn from it, like Gwyneth Paltrow was saying, that you can both kind of grow from it. So it's also active listening is a key skill within the kind of the learning conversation, but we'll talk about that again a little bit more in a moment. And this is a key point, that the skills to develop a learning conversation can be learned and need to be practiced. And I think that's a massive thing in coaching in general. There's this feeling of, you know, a coach, somebody votes you in as a coach, or, you know, twists your arm, turns you into the coach, and then that's it, you're a coach. Like you, and this is what is so great about Derby Stance, is that like people are, you know, and Rule 56's work is that coaches are practicing skills, are sharing good practice, are researching things, and it's just like any other thing in the world, that like with the skaters, you know, you need to learn a skill and practice it to be good at. And it's exactly the same with a learning conversation. All the things that make you good at managing these conversations need to be practiced. You can't just wake up and do them. And it's also, so a learning conversation is an empathetic and honest way to help both coaches and athletes. So it's about both people getting something out of it. So what's the crux of a learning conversation? How do you turn something from a telling conversation into a learning experience for both? One of the first things is to stop arguing about who's right and explore different viewpoints. So it's really easy, especially in like a conflict situation, to focus on what's happened and who was in the wrong and who was in the right. And actually, especially if you have differing opinions on that, you're not really going to get anywhere on that. So there's no need as well to establish what happened in the past and who's right. What you need to focus on is what you're going to do about it, and you can kind of get there by discussing different people's viewpoints. So why do they think this? Why did they do that? Not they did it, they were wrong. And also to separate out the impact from the intention. So just because, for example, you got upset it doesn't mean that that person intended to upset you, and you can't say what a person's intention was. You can only tell them what the impact of it was. So it's something really important to bear in mind when you're talking with someone, especially in a conflict situation. It's important to remember that you're talking about the impact and not the intention. It's not your place to tell that person what they intended. Only they'll know that. So separate out the impact from the intention. And second thing is try not to blame. The third thing, sorry, is try not to blame. It doesn't actually help anyone in this situation. It's not about a learning conversation. Is not about judging, and it's more about trying to figure out what you can do to stop it happening again in the future. If you're just focusing on the past all the time, you're not really going to get anywhere. Oops, I don't know what's happened there. So the fourth thing is kind of to do with the learning conversation. Is a big one for me. I think especially, I know not everybody here is British, but I know especially for British people, sometimes feelings can be really a difficult thing to talk about. They're the kind of things that make a conversation difficult. When people start talking about their feelings or when people get emotional. So I think it's really important, firstly, to just acknowledge them. People are often trying to talk feelings out of the conversation or frame them out of the conversation and approach things like, I'm going to have to I've got to tell her that she's caught from the team, but I'm just going to have to approach it really neutrally, really matter of fact, and that'll help nobody have any feelings about the situation. Well, it just doesn't work that way. You feel what you feel. So I think it's important to be open about your feelings when you're having these conversations. Both your feelings and theirs. So your feelings, tune into your feelings and don't be afraid to express them. For example, you can say to the person, I'm really nervous, like I've been really nervous about this conversation. So then they're aware that, you're emotionally invested too. Or, I feel really disappointed at the lack of commitment from you in the last 3 weeks. That kind of thing. Like if you don't label and acknowledge your feelings openly, they're just going to read into your kind of micro expressions and get their own ideas of your feelings and also their own ideas of why. So if you say to someone, I'm really disappointed in your lack of commitment for the last 3 weeks, you've missed 8 practices, they know that that's why you're upset. And if you don't say that, they could just be guessing, oh, maybe she's upset because any range of things that are totally wrong. So, and also their feelings. If they react in a way that you weren't expecting, and they kind of fly off the handle or burst into tears and uncontrollably sob for 4 hours, you need to be able to stay calm and professional. I think a big thing when it comes to other people's feelings as well is to just ask them how they're feeling and don't assume you know. So just because someone looks upset doesn't mean they are. Just because somebody looks fine doesn't mean they are. You have to ask people how they're feeling. And I think a big one when it comes to roller derby, like with coaches, is not assuming that you know how they feel, as in not trying to show empathy and make it about you. So, for example, if I was, the world's best jammer and I was born skating and I was, I'd never been cut from a team. I'd always been the All-Stars perfect jammer, never missed a game time, anything like that. Then there's no point in me sitting there when I've had to cut someone and say like, oh yeah, I know this is hard, because you don't know it's hard. You've never been through it, so don't tell me that you know it's hard. And I think that can just upset people. It'll just quickly turn into anger. So don't tell people, your feelings in that way. Don't make it about you. Ask them their feelings and acknowledge them. So there you go. So a little bit more about feelings. Like anyone will know, anything that you're doing that's kind of nerve-wracking, something like this, for example, even if you're totally prepared or you know exactly what you're talking about, physically there is a physical reaction when you're nervous or when you're finding something uncomfortable, and that will affect how you perform. Facts, figures, they go out of your mind. Things you wanted to say completely leave your mind. You get all jumbled in your words and you say the wrong thing. So when you're in the middle of a conversation that you might have been dreading and you might have built it up in your mind as this awful thing, or is this awful thing, and they're having a total breakdown in front of you and you can't think of a thing to say, there are some ways of managing your feelings so that you can then deal with the conversation better. And they sound like super hippie, but they're actually really, I've actually used these things when talking to skaters and team members, and they really help. So something as simple as remembering to breathe, like when you're feeling a little panicked and you're starting to talk really fast, or you're getting really angry with the way the person's responding, anything like that, if you just take 2 minutes and breathe, all of a sudden you feel much better and more calm and more able to address the conversation as it should be addressed. And the second one is focus on your body. So, I don't know, maybe the font's a little light there, but I'll sort that out for you. By focus on your body, what we mean is things like, sometimes people feel like if you're going to have a difficult conversation, there's someone on a chair and someone else on a chair, and you both sit and look at each other and talk. Now, that's not really conducive for managing your body very well. If you're feeling quite emotional, it's all going to start, like, you're going to get quite pent up and it's all going to start building. So, if you need to, you can say, I'm just going to stretch my legs for a second, or I'm just going to stand up for 1 minute, or I just need to go and get whatever from wherever, and literally walk out the room and come back. Because physically moving around will release some of the endorphins that are built up from the over emotions that you're feeling. Or things like, if you feel like standing up or walking around might be perceived as threatening to the other person, then just things like pushing your feet into the floor, and grounding your body that way, just makes you focus on that and takes you out of your headspace for a second. Or I know the woman that does yoga with me, she always recommends this, like on each finger with your thumb, that kind of thing, to just take your mind out of itself for a moment. And then you're better able to carry on. Say a mantra. So again, this sounds like super new age, but really it's just a mantra, not as in like a mantra like, Vivien amazing, Vivien amazing, Vivien amazing. Just things like referring to your core statements or the objective of the conversation, because things can quickly get derailed and you find yourself in the middle of an argument that has nothing to do with what you were talking about or that you wanted to talk about. So by creating a mantra and saying it over to yourself once you feel things are getting out of hand, it just brings your mind, it centers your mind, you've just centered your body, and it centers your mind on what the purpose of the conversation was. And then the last one, which is really key, I think people don't feel like they can do this when they're in the middle of a really difficult conversation and emotions are flying and people's feelings are kind of getting out of hand. Taking a break. So just saying like, okay, I think we both need a moment. I'm going to go and have a cup of coffee and a pack of 20 fags, and you can, take a minute and have a drink of water. Having a break is totally fine, and it just means that nobody's going to get to that point where they end up saying something they regret or miscommunicating something. So always feel free in the middle of a difficult conversation to suggest taking a break. Exactly. So we're going to move into some techniques for managing a difficult conversation in a moment. But before we do, again, just to take a little break, we're going to do a little poll, because I'd just like to see what kind of teams you're all representing. And I mean, I'm going to ask you what kind of teams you're representing in terms of your WFTDA ranking, just to give me an idea. I know that a team's worth is not based on their WFTDA ranking, but it's just helpful for me. So I'll give you a second to do that. Thank you. Okay, let's have a little look. Top 10. Okay, so we've got a lot of different like teams represented here, like from top 10 all the way down to not ranked. I mean, not WUFTA ranked might mean that it's, you know, a men's team as well. It might be the best men's team in the world. But it's just interesting for me to see the kind of, you know, the kind of teams and leagues that you're coming from. It's irrelevant really, because these conversations occur in all of them, and the pressures can be the same in any team. So it's just interesting for me to see. Thanks. So we're going to talk about some techniques that you can use then. This is the, because I often like will go to seminars and things about coaching, and when I come away from it, like there's always these like really inspirational speakers, and they're amazing, and then I come away and I'm super pumped, but then I look at my notebook and there's not actually anything concrete for me to do. I just think she's great, and that's it. I should be more great. So what I'm going to try and give you is some concrete things that you can do to manage difficult conversations better. And one of the big things is preparing for it. So what happens all the time in roller derby, because this isn't our job, well, for most of us, this isn't our job. What happens is, as a coach, someone says in a coaching body meeting or a leadership meeting, oh, you know, so-and-so, we need to address this issue with so-and-so. For example, they've been, I don't know, talking shit about another skater, and it's creating a really negative vibe in the team. So they'll just say, you all right dealing with that, Viv? And you go like, right, yeah. Okay, will you speak to her after training in half an hour? Right, okay. Like, and that's really not the best way. I think these conversations you really need to be prepared for. Just like we were saying before about practicing, they need to be prepared for, and they need to be practiced, these skills. So one of the main things is to decide beforehand on an objective. So what is the point of this conversation, and what do you want to see happening afterwards? You know, what's your role in achieving the desired outcome? So there's no point in me just starting a conversation with this skater about the fact that she's talking shit about someone and then go like, see you then. I need to know when I'm going in. What do I want? So when she turns around to me and goes like, right, and I need to know what to say back. I need to know where this conversation's going, what future action's going to be, and what my role's going to be within that. And one thing that helps with that, which I was talking about before in relation to your mantra, is writing like core statements. So if you write 2 or 3 statements that summarize the problem, then you can refer to them, back to them in the middle of your conversation when things can get derailed and go off topic, and you find yourself, you know, debating something completely irrelevant. If you think about your mantra or you think about your core statement, you'll always be able to bring it back to the problem at hand. Some people, without realizing it, are really good at changing the conversation away from things that they don't want to talk about. And if you really need to address that, then your core statements will help. And it just says use I statements. So things like, instead of saying, you know, you, like we said before, the problem is they are always late, or you know what I mean. You can use I statements when you're talking to the other person. It makes them feel less attacked. So I'm disappointed, or I'm struggling to coach sessions with low numbers, or you know, that kind of thing. And be specific. So when addressing someone's behaviour specifically, I mean, not necessarily always with well, actually, probably always. I think when you're giving feedback, when you're giving reasons why someone's not made the team or a charter or a squad, when you're giving somebody, when you're talking about somebody's behaviour, I think it's really important to be specific and give recent examples. So, you know, there's times when people have entered into a conversation about something and gone, yeah, you know, like last Christmas when you did whatever. They're like, well, that's really irrelevant to now, and I've really tried to change since then. So, you know, use recent examples and be specific about people's behaviour. And when giving feedback, give precise, tangible points that can be worked on. There's no point in saying, "Oh, you didn't make the squad, I'm afraid. You know, you're not coming to the tournament because you're not strong enough. You know, you're not strong enough isn't helpful to anyone, or, you know, you're not agile enough. See ya. How's that help your skater?" You need to give them Exactly, actionable steps. You need to give them things that they can work on specifically. Go away, research, figure out, and do. So there you go. Actionable steps. And also, throughout this, I'm talking about checking understanding. When you've said, I think that you really need to work on your edges when using your edges to give you more push to cover the track when using a shuffle step or whatever. Then you at that point will say, do you understand what I mean? Because there's no point in you telling this person the best actionable steps, the best like broken down problems, and then walking off thinking you've done a great job, and they're walking away from the conversation thinking, what the fuck's she talking about? So make sure that they've understood what you've said. And the other thing to prepare in advance is to remember going into it that you want to be positive and focus on the future. So like I said with about blame before, like don't dwell on the past. Once you've made the point, even if you can't agree, I think that's why we get sucked into debating something where basically two people have a completely different point of view and they're not going to agree. So there's no point in sitting there and both getting upset and both getting angry. People say agree to disagree, but really it's more about, okay, that's your viewpoint and this is my viewpoint. What do we do now? It's not what's happened, but what's going to happen next, and how can we move the conversation towards what we do next? So there's that. This is so hard to see. Okay, time and a place. It sounds really simple, but you wouldn't believe the amount of times that I see coaches saying like, oh, can I have a quick word after like a 4-hour training session or something where like a skater would be absolutely shattered physically and mentally, and they just drag them over to tell them something horrific, or where it's really noisy or there's whistles blowing, things like that. Like where you do it is actually really important and it makes a difference. And if something's going to be, if you know somebody's going to get really emotional, do have the make sure that you're having the conversation in private. Even if you need to have someone else present, you can still have that conversation in private. Nobody needs to be bawling their eyes out in front of the rest of their team if they don't want to be. So take them somewhere private and make room for the conversation. And time is also another one. If you've got something you need to say to someone where you think that they're going to get upset, the amount of times that I see coaches saying like, oh, sending an email like, oh, could you come maybe 10 minutes early to training? And then what happens is the conversation actually requires much longer, and the last 3 minutes of the conversation, the coach is just looking at their watch and asking someone to set the cones up and things like that, and how that makes the person you're talking to, how it makes them feel, knowing that you've just squeezed them into your day. So it's really important to take the time and to set it in the right place. So, you're not inviting someone to sit in your car with your pad stench, tell them that they're not coming to champs. You know what I mean? It's basic, but it's really important. And I see it, it's so simple, but I see it all the time. And the other thing that you can prepare here is to know how to begin. And this is something else that I see happen time and time again. So start with a direct approach, I think, and avoid easing in. I think it's really important. A lot of times people talk about that shit sandwich, and I don't agree with it at all. What they'll do is they'll start with something great, and again, it's like don't rely on subtext and don't make the listener guess. So if I start a conversation with like, oh, hey, you've been doing really well at training and you're a really strong player and I've noticed a real improvement. And then I go like, but we're not taking you to champs, or we're not, you've not made the team for the next away game. That's like building them up to then kick them right in the chops. So just start clearly and directly with what you're going to do. Like, so I would say, right, I've asked to speak to you today because we're not going to, take you to champs. We're not going to roster you for the next game. And then they know straight away what the conversation is going to be about. And I think that's really important. And so just as you would know how to begin, you should be planning how to end it. You can't control somebody's reaction to something, but you can plan for it. So I think that's kind of important. If, people say like, oh, what can I do so they don't get upset? well, they're going to get upset. They care about this sport. They care about their role in it. They're going to get upset, and you can't control that, and you have to let go of that and just think about how you can manage that rather than controlling that. And what the agreed action, what is, again, like what you want to see be the outcome of it, and what might prevent that from happening. So what are the possible kind of problems that the other person might throw up? You know, if you say, oh, we're going to, so going forward from this, I want you to come to an extra practice on a Tuesday night. Well, what do you do if they say, well, I can't come on a Tuesday night? What's your B? Your plan B? What's your plan C? And then also, what's going to be the follow up? When are you going to kind of come back and check on this and review the situation? So that's all the things that you can do before you've even had the conversation. So the next time somebody asks you to have a difficult conversation with someone, you've got all this to do before you even sit down with them. And that is that. I don't know what, I'm on 12. There you go. So then you move on to actually having the conversation. Here's just some of the things that you can do to manage it whilst you're in the middle of it. And like I've talked about, being direct, be open, honest, clear, and direct. Say what you mean. It's so important. If you've got a hidden agenda, the other person will pick up on it. If you don't feel that they're performing well, tell them why. Obviously, some of these people are your teammates and they're your friends. But I know that as difficult as it is to be honest with a teammate or a friend, ultimately these are athletes, and this is a sport. And I would always respect, and I think that it's mostly true, that you would get more respect just from being honest. If they find out that you've placated them in the conversation and then said something completely different in a leadership meeting, that's going to be so hurtful. So you can't really do anything other than be open and honest. I think it's really important to think about your non-verbal communication. You've got to be mindful of your tone of voice, your volume, eye contact, open posture, and all of that. At the end, I've got a reading, like a recommended reading book about non-verbal communication if anybody wants to kind of swat up on that. It's crazy the things that you give away without even noticing. I think allowing silence within the conversation is an important one. There'll be moments in the conversation where a silence occurs, and this is fine. It just, people might be processing things, trying to think about what this, like, extrapolate the situation. So just allow that, and you don't feel like you have to fill every moment. If you've told the person the reasons why, then just let them sink in. Don't keep going over the same old ground. And it's important to preserve the relationship. So if it is a conversation about conflict, like, separate the person from the issue. So and again, focus on solutions. So you don't hate the person. I'm not disappointed. I'm not disappointed with you. I'm disappointed that we haven't been able to progress together because your attendance has been poor. That's what I'm disappointed in. I'm not disappointed in the person. People always say it about children, like, separate the behaviour from the person, and that's the same thing. And then another one I think is really important that comes up quite a lot is to address any passive-aggressive behaviour. Obviously, people, like somebody wrote before, obviously people become really defensive when you're having a difficult conversation, or when they're being, when they feel like they're being attacked, or they feel like they're receiving criticism. Some people's first place to go to is to react quite passive aggressively. And I think it's important to address that there and then. So if somebody's being sarcastic back, or they're stonewalling you, or anything like that, address it there and then, and you'll find that they often kind of retreat on that, and what comes out is something honest. So if somebody makes a sarcastic comment, oh yeah, that's great, like, well, can you kind of talk to me about that, because it doesn't sound like you think that's great. And then you'll soon find out what they actually feel, and then just remind them that why you're there to help, you're there to find solutions and to do your job. There we go. So we talked before a little bit about active listening, and I'm just going to talk, this is the last slide, I'm just going to tell you some useful skills when it comes to active listening. It's a big thing in the workplace, and really it should be a big thing in life. Often in conversations, people say they're listening, and they may well be, but what's important is for the other person to feel heard, and active listening is going to help you with that. So one of the things you can do for that to help is ask open questions. So obviously everybody knows this, like how, what, where, why, who. I think rather than just saying, did you do this? Yeah. Did you not do that? No. Well, why, or where were you when you should have been here, or why couldn't you X, Y, and Z? I think open-ended questions are you're going to get a much better conversation out of it, and the person that you're speaking to is going to feel much more heard. I think a big thing for me when it comes to questioning is inquiring to learn. So don't make statements disguised as questions, which people do all the time. People will say things like, for example, well, oh, I can't think of any now. But they'll say like, oh well, do you think it was good enough that you turned up 20 minutes late? Well, you're not actually asking them, do they think it's good enough? You're trying to tell them you don't think it's good enough. So make the statement, don't ask a question. You know that it's not good enough, and that's what you're trying to tell them. But make it safe for them not to answer. So if you actually have a question for them, you've prepared for this conversation and you know that it's happening, and you've got your mantra and your core statements and you've got all of that. They probably don't have that. So if they don't know how to respond and they don't know what to say, make that, let them know that that's okay. Give them time not to answer, and give them the freedom not to answer there and then. Another useful active listening skill is summarizing and paraphrasing. The good thing about doing that is it gives a chance for you to check that you understood something, and it allows that person to feel heard. So if somebody, if we've talked for a long time, like we have today, if somebody's talked at me this long, I'd want them to then check that I've understood, and I'd want to check that they've understood what I've been saying. So by paraphrasing, by saying, okay, so you're telling me that you've not been, I keep saying coming to training, like we have a terrible attendance problem at Rainy, but we don't. So you've not been coming to training because you, first of all, weren't feeling well, and since then you felt isolated from the team and you're struggling to get back into things. If you repeat to them what they've said, firstly, they know you've heard, but secondly, you've checked that you've understood and you've not misunderstood anything. You're not making any assumptions then. Clarify. So if there is something that you don't understand, if they've just briefly mentioned something, make sure that you say, like, sorry, can I just stop you there? Can you expand on that? Or can you tell me a bit more about this? Because, tell me a bit more about that. It says in the slides is a good way to kind of just get somebody to expand on something, either that you want to know more about or that you didn't quite understand. I don't think anybody's ever lost the plot because you've asked to understand more. It's usually when you just walk away thinking you know and you don't. And a big part of active listening is give words of encouragement. I think even the little things like, yeah, eye contact, nodding your head, saying yeah, saying okay, saying thanks for that, that really helps. And the last thing is respond. So directly address the points that are raised by the person you're talking to. Don't just say like, all right, okay, but what I was saying was, if somebody's taken the time to tell you something, allow them to feel heard by responding. So, okay, I completely understand why you weren't there that day. Thank you for telling me that. But the point I'm trying to make is, and actually, you'd be better to not say but, you'd be better to say and the point I'm trying to make is. And that's a really good kind of, they're like some really small changes you can make to show active listening when talking to others. The effects of not listening carefully to people or allowing them to feel listened to can be really dramatic on people, and it can have a terribly negative effect. Like in this little clip that Hydra's going to play for you now. This is just an example of somebody who's doing really poor listening, and have a look at the things that we just talked about that they aren't doing. I think she's going to do it for me. Give me 2 seconds. It's just a tiny little clip from the film that it just kind of is the perfect example of someone not doing all the things we just spoke about. Oh, never mind, it doesn't matter. It must be broken, but that's fine. We'll go back to the slides. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you've probably all been on the receiving end of people that are terrible at listening anyway. So lastly, just some recommended reading. One book that was all about difficult conversations that I absolutely loved is this one, Difficult Conversations, How to Discuss What Matters Most. That's on your slide. It's really good. In there, it's like what I've talked about is just the tip of the iceberg. It breaks everything down in there about kind of how you approach conversations, whose point of views you're coming in at it from. That's the one I'd recommend the most. But there's also 3 others there, and that one I was talking to you about body language, that's on there as well, about like kind of non-verbal communication. So that's it from me in terms of that. Hopefully the next time you have to tell a teammate or friend something that you really don't want to, you'll feel better equipped to do it. I think as long as you prepare and you practice your skills and you keep in mind all of this, it's so easy to just throw that out the window and think, well, I'll just dive into this conversation, get it out of the way. If you really make the effort to plan the conversation well, it makes a massive difference. And it can be the difference between, you know, the way you handle these conversations can be the difference between really motivating a player to go on and become the best they can be, or, you know, quitting the sport that they absolutely love and the one place they feel at home. So it's a big responsibility and it should be taken seriously. So that's it. Does anybody, I think we've got about 4 minutes maybe. I don't really know because we started late. But if anybody's got any questions, I know there's a little question tool. Please feel free to do that now. I don't know if I need to do that. Oh no, there we go. She's good. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes, and if not, then we'll go. Oh, that's really nice. We had like super technical issues at the beginning, so I was like mega flustered when we started. Just give that a couple of minutes in case anyone is typing any questions. But it is, yeah, it is the sucky part of the job. I mean, when Hydra asked me to do this webinar on this topic, because she asked me to do this topic, and I kind of thought, well, I can't really talk for an hour about managing difficult conversation. But the more I kind of researched it and the more I thought about my own practice, and the more I realised you could probably talk about it for about a week. A smiley face. Nice one. Advice when you have a team head. Oh, how not that. Oh, there you go. So, advice when you have a team head coach who is a horrible communicator with conflict, and how to support team leadership without undermining their authority. That's a good one. I mean, I think any time that you need to support someone, it's, you know, who's kind of a co-coach or a head coach, it's really difficult to do any of it without undermining authority, and that's the hard part, because often we know how to support someone, we just don't really know how to do it without making them feel small or stupid. And I think things like, you know, this book or this webinar or anything like that, you know, you can always approach the person and say, oh, hey, I read this amazing book. It really helped me. Do you want to borrow it? Or, you know, I think if you frame things in terms of yourself, often that really helps. So, like, you could say to the other person that I had a conversation with so and so the other day, and I think it went really well. One of the things I did that really helped was X, Y, and Z, and frame it based around you. And then, obviously, then if the person, and that's kind of how you would approach it initially, if it wasn't drastic. But if you have a head coach who's like a horrible communicator, as in this is detrimental and horrific, then again, like I've said in the webinar, that's then a difficult conversation for you, and I would address it just as I've said. I'd speak with them directly and openly and honestly, and say, I know you have the best intentions, and I know that, you know, you don't want to upset people. Well, I assume you have the best intentions, but the impact that you're having is this, and lay it out for them and just be honest. If it's not that drastic, though, I would kind of just do it a little bit more subtly, like I said, first off. Hope that helps. I mean, it's just a sucky situation. Is that everything? That was a good question, though. Cool. Well, thank you all so much, and hopefully, you know, you can go out there and get your point across without crushing dreams and hopes, and having conversations and then going and crying in the bathtub. Bye.